Welcome, everybody, and thank you for coming out on this terrible evening of weather, right, and other things happening in the area. My name is Beth Fisher-Yoshida. I have a couple of roles. I'll only talk about the ones that are relevant for tonight, and that is I'm the Program Director of the Master of Science in Negotiation and Conflict Resolution, and I'm also the Executive Director of AC4, which is the consortium that houses the Women, Peace, and Leadership Program that we are officially launching this evening. It used to be the Women, Peace, and Security Program that closed about 2 years ago, and we reopened as Women, Peace, and Leadership. So I just want to give a little bit of a background of why we're doing what we're doing tonight. We're here in celebration of Women's International Month, and we are here in this space to create something together, to hear from some people in the field who are doing amazing things that you'll get to hear from. We have people working in research, people working in the field in applied ways. We have people working in the arts, people working in NGOs, all towards figuring out how to advance women's role in peace and peace building and negotiations, conflict resolution, and so on. So I'm going to give a little bit more of a formal introduction and also a little bit about how the evening is going to go so you have a sense of the flow. So this is the opening. That's me now doing the introductions here. Then we're going to have the first panel, and I'll introduce each panel speaker when we get to the panel. And people will be talking about women in peace-building efforts, right? It could be peace building with a capital P, negotiations, or small, everyday kinds of peace building. And then we will switch and we'll show a wonderful documentary about women graffiti artists and feminizing the streets. And then we'll have a second panel of the people who made that film. And when we're doing the panels, we really encourage you to think of some good comments and questions you'd like to ask, because we want to make sure that there's audience participation in there. Any questions so far? And then we have a reception. We have beautiful photographs outside and a beautifully, very interesting lit reception area with plants. They asked us if we wanted plants, and we said, of course we want plants, so that's great. So I think, let me just say a little bit more about setting the context. We were supposed to have one or two other people here, but you got me, right? All right, so the first panel includes a representation of women who use both differing and overlapping lenses, and you get to see how they work together to look at the role of women in peace building, negotiation, conflict resolution, research, and practices. And collectively, we include perspectives from the academy, NGOs, the arts, and from the field, which I think includes every other space there is in the world, right? So we're going to have the first panel come up, and then I will introduce the panel speakers, and we'll get to hear from them, and then you'll get to ask your questions, okay? So if I can have the first panel come up here. Do I have to turn this on? Oh, no, it's on. Great. Okay. I have to coordinate everything here. All right. So going across, I'm going to introduce each person and what they're going to speak about, and then they'll speak, and then we'll have an interactive discussion. So first to my left is Flynn Coleman, who is an author, international human rights attorney, political scientist, an environmental advocate, and a professor. In her spare time, no, I'm kidding. She writes and speaks about what it means to be human and what it means to be humane. I like that little difference there. She is the author of the book, A Human Algorithm, a groundbreaking narrative on the urgency of humanely designed AI, and a guidebook to reimagining life in the era of intelligent technology. Flynn is a Fulbright specialist with the U.S. Department of State, a Henry Luce Scholar, a Council on Foreign Relations, Stephen M. Kellen member, the recipient of the YFU Distinguished Alum Award, and the inaugural recipient of a Women in Sports Award. She's also the honoree of the NCP Visionary Award, and she takes a cross-cultural perspective in her work, having lived and worked in many countries around the world. And tonight, as a member of this panel, Flynn will explore the role of women in peace building and resistance through the lens of storytelling and collective action. Drawing on her work with the Artpeleristas, okay, we'll get there, of Chile, women who have used art and activism to document human rights abuses and demand justice, she's going to highlight how women, often historically excluded from formal peace processes, continue to shape memory, advocate for truth, and redefine healing in conflict and post-conflict societies, and how investing in women is an investment in justice. And we can all get behind that, right? Then we have Julia Ivova Vassileva. Julia is a visiting scholar at Columbia University's AC4. Her institutional affiliation is as a research fellow in international law and security studies at Tallinn University in Estonia, and she's now finalizing her PhD on women's leadership and empowerment in peace negotiations in the post-Soviet space, Eastern Europe, and the Caucasus. Her previous education includes a Master of Philosophy in International Relations, a Master Jurist in Law, and an MA in EU International Relations and Diplomacy. Professionally, she has worked for the EU Commission and EU Diplomatic Service and was an external researcher with NATO. Today, Julie will present some of the findings from her research on the inclusion of women in peace processes in the post-Soviet space, Eastern Europe and the Caucasus. She has been based in Estonia and conducted extensive field work on the role of women in peace processes in Ukraine, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Moldova. Her particular interest is the reasons for ongoing exclusion of women from peace processes and negotiations, especially high-level negotiations. And through this discussion, she aims to challenge the gap between rhetoric and reality in peace-building efforts and to emphasize the need for structural changes that enable genuine and sustained female participation in peace processes and high-level peace negotiations and beyond. And I think we can all agree that the post-Soviet place in the world is very important right now. And then we have, at the end of the panel here, Catherine Andela. She's currently the Senior Gender Advisor and Chief of Gender Unit of the Department of Peace Operations in the United Nations headquarters in New York. She has over 25 years of experience working on protection and gender equality programming in humanitarian and developmental settings. Her fieldwork includes being the Gender Advisor in MINUSMA, Mali, Senior Interagency Gender-Based Violence and Gender Advisor across West and Central Africa, Europe, and the Middle East, including Turkey, Jordan, Syria, and Yemen. Her research and interests include protection and political participation of women, with a focus on peace processes and gender-responsive institutional reforms and the advancement of gender equality. She holds a master's in library sciences and information management from the University of Applied Sciences for Library and Documentation Science of Cologne, and a master in sociolinguistics from the University of Cologne, Germany. And today, Catherine will brief us all on how peacekeeping operations support women's participation in peace and political processes and to assure sustainability in a geopolitically complex and turbulent context. She will illustrate this with some concrete examples from field missions in which she has participated. I think the introductions alone, we've learned a lot, right? Now we're going to hear, right? So we'll hear from each woman for about 5 minutes and then have a discussion and you'll ask your questions. So I'll turn to Flynn.
Okay, thank you so much, Beth, for that incredible introduction. And I'm honored and delighted to be here to kick this off. I plan to speak briefly and much more casually as we kind of introduce some of the incredible research that's being done. And tonight is particularly special to me because the story I'm about to describe is really kind of what, maybe for many of you as well, kind of accidentally set off a lot of the work I ended up doing in the world. And so I'm really excited to hear from this panel and the next panel and to see this art. And it's really kind of a homecoming for me for reasons that will become evident. So just to tell a brief story as to kind of how I fell down this rabbit hole, and it's interesting that Beth had mentioned the women in sports connection because being a woman as part of a community is really what set me down this path. And I originally moved to Chile to study with members of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and ended up becoming a human rights lawyer and thinking about all of these judicial mechanisms and these legal mechanisms. And so that's what I was there to do on a much more formal basis. And while I was wandering around Santiago doing this work, I literally stumbled upon what appeared to be a women's artistic atelier workshop. And I literally wandered in. And I felt the pull to go in, and I saw these women creating these, what appeared to be pieces of art. And there was a very, very kind of loud energy in the room, and everyone was working together. They clearly knew each other, and I started to ask a lot of questions about what they were doing. And they were creating these tapestries called arpilleras. I don't know if anyone has ever seen one or is familiar with this work, but they're essentially small-scale tapestries. And what I would come to learn is that these tapestries weren't just pieces of art. They were women stitching together scenes of the disappearances, torture, brutality enacted against their loved ones, often their husbands, sons, family members. And I got to know this group of artists, and I got to watch what they were doing alongside the more formal mechanisms that were taking place. And I ended up becoming extremely involved in their work. They had all lost someone during the Pinochet era, and I ended up collecting a lot of what they had done and telling their story back in the United States. And people were immediately gravitating towards this story. And what I realized is that this art wasn't just art, it was justice, it was resistance, it was using whatever mechanisms that these women had at their disposal. And what became even more interesting is that yes, it was art, yes, it was resistance, it was community, but it was also financial and business skills learning in this workshop. It was coming together to form this collective movement. Mind you, no social media was involved. There was no formal invitation to participate in any of these mechanisms. They were just doing what they could, and they were telling a story. And so then I started to realize that stories can become justice, because what I've seen in my work is that so much of what we do, or what we're tasked to do as humans, is to bear witness, and to hear and to see and to listen to testimony, and to bear witness to our humanity through others. And so, of course, as many of you probably know very well, intimately, the story in Chile or elsewhere, a lot of these women were not invited into any of the formal processes to figure out what had happened to their family members. They were not at the negotiating table, but they were stitching away. Stitch by stitch, they were creating this fabric. They were smuggling some of these outside of the country. They were selling some. They were creating this tapestry of what a future post-conflict world might look like, while everyone else was scrambling to figure out the legal mechanisms. And again, as will be familiar whether it's in Chile or elsewhere, there was a lot of problems with creating these legal mechanisms of justice. And so what I realized is that behind the scenes of who was at the actual negotiating table was the art, the witness, the bearing witness to what was happening. And that art could be resistance, and that this storytelling has this power to connect with us in ways that judicial mechanisms don't. So flash forward many years later, I'm studying truth and reconciliation. I am thinking about these legal mechanisms and what it means to try a war criminal or to find justice on that level. And so much of that over the past 30 years has failed. But meanwhile, behind the scenes, people are creating their own sense of justice and their own sense of community. And so when we think about today, whether it's the movies we're going to watch, the art we're going to look at, the stories that we're going to hear, is that women have been traditionally excluded, marginalized communities writ large have been excluded, yet the data has started to show what we're going to hear more about. When women are at the negotiating table, peace lasts longer, justice comes sooner. And that we're doing the work day in, day out, and we're telling these stories. And so what I would ask of all of us in this room as we listen to these stories is, yet still, whose story isn't being told? Who still isn't at the table? Who can we bring in? What small way can we contribute? I literally stumbled into this room of women who completely changed the trajectory of my life. Partially through an accident on my part, just watching what they were doing and watching while everyone was, debating about who gets to be invited and who's there and who matters. They were saying, my family members matter. And I'm going to stitch this fabric because my son mattered, my husband mattered, my brother, my family member mattered, and one day someone will tell our story. And so when I think about who gets to tell our stories and who gets to kind of bear witness, we can all play a role in that. And so I'm really excited to hear about what's next, because it means the world to me to even be sitting here to play a small role in just bearing witness. And that's the call to action I think about in my work. How can we continue to bear witness, and whose story is still yet to be told? And I also will just say, on a kind of a related note, when I think about things like the future that we are inheriting and a lot of the work that we're doing now that's playing out technologically, we have a lot more power now to be sharing these stories. With all the negative aspects that are coming with that world, the power to share our stories is also there. So I'm honored to be a part of this, and every day in my work I think about those women that welcomed me essentially into their living room and kind of taught me about the type of person I would like to be. So thank you.
Thank you, Flynn. And now we'll have Julia.
Yes, I hope with these microphones, it's always difficult to know if they're on. Well, thank you so much, Beth, and thank you, Flynn, for this introductory remarks. And I think, I was really excited about the change of the title of this event, which is Women, Peace, and Leadership, which changes the common phrase that we use of women, peace, and security. It changes security to leadership, which is very much in line with the research that I'm doing, as you mentioned. Over the past years, I've been doing extensive fieldwork in the post-Soviet space, on Ukraine and in sort of on the peace process in Ukraine, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Moldova. A region that is very complex and where you understand that peace processes require a very good understanding of the geopolitics around these conflicts, right? And so I think the debate in the field of research on women, peace, and security has for a long time focused very much on the so-called track 2 and 3 of peace processes, so the civil society and grassroots level inclusion of women, which is extremely important, but my research argues, or I think that we should also start to move the debate to inclusion of women on track 1 and track 1.5, which is really the leadership level in peace processes. And that is a level in which I was looking into why women are still underrepresented on this level. This is often for very practical reasons. Track 1 and 1.5 in peace processes are position-based. What does it mean? It means that you can only participate if you're the foreign minister, the deputy foreign minister, and so on in the country, positions that are usually held by men. But track 1.5 also involves very high-level diplomats. And there, you can ask, why are women still underrepresented? Because we do have very high-skilled female diplomats also in this space. And so I set out with this research to look into, okay, we have all these commitments in practice. We have UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security from the year 2000, so it's 25 years old. We have national action plans in implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 1325 that commit to an increased inclusion of women in peace and security. So why are we still seeing an underrepresentation of women in practice, and especially on the high level of these peace processes? And as I said, one of the reasons for the exclusion is indeed that participation is position-based, but another one that my research found was something that is also linked to the title of this event today, was the issue of empowerment. So how do we empower women? And how do we empower ourselves and each other as women to really participate on the high level, not just grassroots civil society activism, but really to be involved in those discussions where the decisions are made about security, about defense, about borders. And these are issues that you have to discuss in a peace process. And there is no reason that only men should lead these discussions. We as women, we can discuss such issues, and we should be involved, and women should be involved on this level as well. There is a plethora of research that shows that ceasefire agreements can be reached quicker if women are involved. The peace processes, peace agreements last longer when women are involved on high level as well. So there are very compelling reasons to include women. And we need to address maybe the reasons why they're still excluded. So that's what my research is doing. And that's why I'm also excited to speak on this panel tonight with this title, precisely Women, Peace, and Leadership, which replaces the security in this common phrase of women, peace, and security.
Thank you, Julia. And Catherine, let's hear from you.
Yeah, thanks. So it's good to come after Julia, because I will not respond to the question why women are still underrepresented at Peace Talk, but to tell us that that's our role as people working on gender issues within the UN system, to make sure that we have the necessary steps to support those women. So of course there is I won't say a disconnect, but there is a space between, for example, New York, Geneva, and Colombia, or Mali, or even Ukraine. So you may take decisions at the Security Council, at the C-34. So I'm working for peacekeeping. So the C-34 is the subsidiary body for questions on peacekeeping. That's where all member states come together, troop and police contributing countries come together and make some recommendations as of how peacekeeping function. So decisions are taken there. Gender experts have to see how they also sit at the table. And we definitely sit because there is a WPS chapter. So it's not that we are absent. But what we say, what we recommend on paper, without, for example, the woman at national level represented in those discussions, because that's at the diplomatic level, of course, we have to make sure that we bring then the voices from the women, since they are not there. We have to make sure that the language that is used really reflects what is happening on the ground. Just to be very practical, at the C34, we can discuss, for example, on enabling environment. And we can realize that we don't have enough women peacekeepers in uniform, because women peacekeepers, you have civilians and women in uniform. So the TCCs and PCCs, for troop contributing countries and police contributing countries, will tell you, oh yes, but we don't have enough women because the conditions, because it's not a conducive environment, because there is no latrine, etc., in the camp, or they are at risk, even vis-à-vis their male peers. Then it's something like that is discussed. Of course, this is really UN internal, how we will make this enabling environment for the peacekeepers. But there are also thoughts on how effectively we will support the host country. So there are other discussions happening. For example, how can we ensure that we promote the full, equal, and meaningful participation of women in peace processes? What are the instruments, apart from the 1325, the resolution 1325? What can we again stress as recommendation in the C34 discussions? That's an example. Another example is the Security Council, that's where the mandate will be discussed. The peacekeeping mission is renewed every year, except when there is really an extreme situation. So at the Security Council, that's where we have the possibility to have briefers from the civil society organizations. And those briefers, we also make sure that we have like women rights defenders. So women human rights defenders also coming and speaking, but that's very sensitive. We have to also ensure the protection of those briefers. At the Security Council, you will have like the national counterpart also coming and brief. And you will have the head of mission, the head of the peacekeeping mission coming. So sometimes, for the same country, the same context, you will have like different views. And of course, then the way it is debated at the Security Council, then a resolution will then result from the discussions. And that's the resolution that will apply for a year, again, for the peacekeeping mission to be operational. What does it mean? It seems like a lot of blah, blah, blah. No. The resolution should entail strong WPS language and provisions. And that's only when we have like those strong provisions that now it goes from headquarters, it comes at national level for the mission to implement that mandate, based on that resolution. But based on the information that were provided first from the national context up to the Security Council. So everything is linked. There is no hazard. So if you don't have good gender expertise at national level, if you have not supported your national government to own the process of implementing WPS, if you have not supported the gender machinery, the Ministry of Women Affairs, etc., if you have not integrated and mainstream gender and WPS within the mission, if you have not partnered, team up with the member states at national level, so we are no more in headquarters, member states terminé. We are now at national level. At national level, they are not called member states anymore, but donors, donors, embassies, etc. So all stakeholders must be involved. But of course, and that's the title, Women, Peace and Leadership. Of course, we don't support and decide for the women. So anything that is done, that is thought of, should be in concertation with the women. From all levels, at local level, educated, non-educated, women leaders, from the government, MPs, all must be contacted and engaged. I will now give an example from Mali. I don't know if you remember, there was a clash between the government and even the UN, and the government asked the UN to withdraw, the peacekeeping mission to withdraw. The peacekeeping mission was the MINUSMA, and but what is interesting is like MINUSMA was the only setting among the peacekeeping missions that supported the peace agreement and the participation of women, that accounted for almost 40%. That's a precedent. It never happened nowhere. But we realize that having women in numbers, is it what matters? Or that this is this aspect of effectiveness and meaningful that matters? That was tricky, but of course, if we play that game of, because on one hand we want like more women at the peace negotiation or in the follow-up of the peace agreement, like in Mali, and on the other hand, women they are not capacitated. Well, let's capacitate them. So, and the two parts of the peace agreement, because there are three. I mean, there was the government and two rebel fractions. And the two rebel fractions said, you want to have the women? The international community said, yes, we want to have more women. Okay, we will bring them, but we don't have money. The international community said, we will secure the monthly allocation to the women at the same rate like their counterpart. So we are talking about women that suddenly received every month from funding put together from the donors, that were receiving like 3 times what even the ministry earned in that country, which was good. That was our goal. But then the two rebel fractions brought sisters, lovers, cousines. Those are the women. But of course, we cannot decide on their behalf. And I cannot judge because she is a sister or a mother or a cousin. So what we did, the astuce, the trick that we found was to capacitate those women, bring them. And they started liking that. Because they had now some considerations. And we also realized during those negotiations that they were not silent. They were not silent. So what you see outside of the space and seeing oh no, those are sisters and lovers, and what you see and experience when you are in, and I was in the discussion, and for the first time in the discussions, there were topics like reopening the schools because all the schools were closed in the north of Mali, so reopening the schools, about livelihood, so other things that prevent also somehow the advancement of the peace agreement. And lucky enough, that's how you see also that men are really good in distracting everyone. Because what happened? What happened once MINUSMA withdraw because they say we will solve it all together, and we have 40% of the women at the committee, the follow-up committee of the peace agreement. Once we withdraw, and then there is no peace agreement anymore. For those that follow a bit this African, from the Sahel, that African region. No peace agreement, no need for peace. So the government and the two rebel factions came together, and everyone is now living all together. Is it because now we had so many women? And then everything was kind of disclosed that, finally, they were all profiting from all those money, funding, etc. So let's be very focused when we are talking about leadership. Let's not be distracted by the level of education of the women. They are all powerful and in numbers, yes. And I will maybe stop there saying I'm so happy that we have this.
Thank you, Catherine. It's a great
topic.
example.
Yeah.
So I think what you can see is from the examples that the women up here gave. Yes? I would say it also is mirrored in some of the research I've done with women and negotiation, is that you have two extremes sometimes, where you have talking about building capacity in women to be able to be at the table, and very often you talk about empowerment, and women don't feel they necessarily have the skills, and also culturally, the different stories and messages they've received about not being good enough, not being qualified enough plays a role. So then if you want to increase their capacities, then some people say, well, don't blame the women because the women are products of their culture and society. Let's look at the systemic issues. And as we saw here from different examples, there are lots of ripple effects from what happens systemically. So culturally, systemically, in organizations, in our policies, in our politics, and so on. So it's a combination. We have to look at lots of different things in lots of different ways, taking a social, psychological orientation if it's the individual and then the layers of the systems together. So this would be a great time. We have a microphone over here. We have a microphone over there. We have about 10 or 15 minutes to have you come up and ask a question of the panel. This is when you get to participate. So there's a mic here, a mic there. Please feel free. And please introduce yourself if you can.
Sure thing. My name's Carla Sanchez. Hi.
Hi.
I had a question for Julia. I was wondering, while you were speaking, you mentioned a lot on the strengths that women bring to the table. And I was wondering, what would you say are some strengths that had helped create the conversation, that led to ceasefires lasting longer? What about our lived experiences and our formal experiences led to that versus a men's lived experience.
Thank you for that question. So it's really about building on when you mentioned that the women create longer lasting peace processes, so questioning that part.
So I think I can't respond to exactly the qualities of women that make these negotiations quicker and more effective, but some of them just pertain to the way that women are able to, with a bit more emotional intelligence maybe, or being a bit more insightful, and maybe this is also linked a little bit to the research on women in negotiations more generally, achieve outcomes where we have a more effective negotiation process. Maybe that's what you mean. Is that yeah?
So I think also just building, because I work with Julia too, is that there are more nuances in perspective, and it's more well-rounded, that men have a different experience in how they negotiate and their style, and that's been shown. If you wanted to add a response to that, please, Flynn or Catherine.
You've covered it beautifully. I love this question too, because it of course has relevance, deep relevance for today's world, and that's of course what we're thinking about. How are we going to use all of this for the future based on this global experience? And the numbers also, the data also plays out for peace process, and it's not just that a ceasefire or peace process will be more successful with the women at the table, but that they'll last longer. And the numbers are really, really stark. I mean, for peace process, I think it's like 20% for the first 2 years and 30%, 35% over 15 years. So the peace will last longer. And I think that's also goes to just the tactics of what it means to create peace and what it means to stop the fighting now versus a post-conflict world where we're building. And I think Beth really nailed it with the nuance of not just stop it for today, but how are we building a world where we're more inclusive writ large. And those studies also are connected to, I think, when we think about women bringing back a successful negotiation to their communities. So there's that reinvestment circle that you see a lot when women are at the table, where they're not just interested in a solution for themselves, but oftentimes bringing back the learnings to the community. And then exactly as Catherine was saying, talking to other members of the community. So I think the ripple effects are really relevant there.
And if I may just add, one of the findings that came out from the research that I did with high-level negotiators was that they said that when there is a woman in the room in those high-stakes negotiations, it automatically changes the dynamics in the room. So these are really tense environments where if there are only men in the room, then they would be shouting at each other and very ego-driven. Not finding an agreement. Whereas when you have a woman in the room, it automatically changes the dynamics. So that can be very beneficial to the negotiations, and that's why we can. That's why we say that ceasefire agreements or agreements in general often reach quicker when there is a woman in the room.
The other thing that's really interesting is that at the grassroots level, it's predominantly women. It's not a question. Maybe the middle tier, opinion leaders, women. But then what happens is that if you have a certain level or rank of person who has a certain position in a government who comes to the table for track one, and women just aren't present in that rank, that's why we have a systemic issue. So it's like when you have an organization and we say, well, who's in the top leadership? Majority of people in the Fortune 500 are men because women are not in those positions. So systemically, we have to make a difference so that we have people qualified at the level to then participate. I think we have time for another question. Come on down. Thank you. I see movement.
Hi, thank you for speaking with us today. This has been really awesome. So Catherine gave
can
us
you
a
say
really
your
good, my name is Rita Legro. I'm in the Sustainability Management Program here. So Catherine gave us a really good example of how men have been engaged in Mali, I think it was. Mm-hmm. And so what are some other ways that you've seen men successfully engage in these conversations, given that a majority of those decision-making positions are men? How do we gain access from them? Like, what are those engagement tools that you might think would be helpful?
Okay.
Say something, Catherine? Yeah.
Should I?
No, please go ahead.
Yeah? Okay, let me, so for those, I will give you very concrete examples. So bear with me if I'm reading and not speaking. So, for example, in Cyprus, we do have a peacekeeping mission, which is called UNFICIP. And what we did, we supported the action plan on women full, equal, and meaningful participation in the settlement process. And this process was agreed by the Greek Cypriot leader and the Turkish Cypriot leaders. So with that, specific provision on the women participation, we managed to have like the two leaders coming together. And it paved the way for intercommunal cooperation between Turkish Cypriot and Greek Cypriot. So there are ways to really, not be frontal, but having the men also addressing gender issues and having the women participating. I will stop there because I will have like many examples to some of the questions.
It's a challenge. There you are. Yeah, it's a challenge for sure because you have to think about, okay, so maybe one idea, and I'm just brainstorming here, would be if we have women leaders of organizations, even if it's not at that level, they're still coming to the table in some capacity, especially when it comes to helping decide how to implement decisions. So you're starting to move up the ranks and giving examples, and then sometimes women have to assert themselves into situations more and more. And so I think the more we band together with different kinds of organizations, have a stronger voice, a stronger presence in lots of different ways throughout different layers of society, then eventually it will happen. It's not going to happen overnight, but I think we have to try as much as we can in different ways and then eventually grow it together. So we have some marches happening on Saturday, right? We have International Women's Month. And, I think sometimes, well, why do we need a month to celebrate women when we should have every month of the year to celebrate women? But sometimes we need this month to just draw attention to and highlight some of the wonderful work and accomplishments that women are doing and have been doing. And by magnifying that voice, then I think we empower more people to take more action as well. And then people who are not women get to notice, right? We have another question coming in? Okay, this will be our final question for this panel, but please go ahead, introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Destiny Daniel. I'm in the nonprofit management program, and I thank you all so much for being here. I was trying to process, your words, the storytelling involved to kind of get a bigger sense of our conversation today, but I just had a question about feminist research. As a master's student, I'm looking to partake in research. And just your thoughts about what feminist research is, what does it represent, and how feminist research can reshape the global narratives around women and peace building. Thank you.
Specifically about feminist research
yes, feminist
methodologies?
Research. If you can, methodologies. What does that look like actually look like for us to take part in? Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I'll just quickly, because I'd love to hear what everyone else has to say, but I think Catherine set it up beautifully when you used, I believe the phrase was the gender lens. And I love the idea of thinking about a gender lens in an interdisciplinary way, so not segregating feminist research outside the scope of all of the other work that we do. So always having that voice at the table saying, how are we bringing a gender lens into this? Or what would it look like to support gender equity in this, whether it's financial, agricultural, legal negotiations. So that would just be my way of thinking about what the future of feminist research might look like in a really intersectional, global, cross-pollinating way.
Yeah, if I can go next. I do agree very much with Flynn's point on not segregating feminist research from the overall discussion in this on peace building, but also more generally, because I think the problem with the term feminist research, when you put it out there, it scares a lot of people off, in a sense that a lot of high-level decision makers that are in charge, when they hear this term, they don't really want to engage. And the problem is also with this, with the term feminism, it's so complex and it's so multi-layered and everyone understands something different. But sometimes in very high-stakes negotiations, if you want to be included, you have to know how to sell the idea that women should be there to those who are making the decisions on who should be in the room. And you have to do this in a very, I think, smart and constructive way, so that you ensure inclusion on the highest, on high levels of peace processes and peace negotiations, and in general.
Did you want to add anything to that, Catherine? So I think feminist methodologies have to be part of the story, because it does add a very critical, important lens, as do other methods. So let's give a round of applause to our panel here. Thank you.